Hello, my dear friends, my lovely audience. Welcome to the East West Show. Jack Chow on the East West Show with Xinyi TV. This year, April 4th, marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was such a loss to the contemporary American movement, political movement, and it is such a loss today that shows the dream that Dr. Luther King was once talking about has not been realized. And we are still far away from accomplish of the dream. So today, in commemoration of that day, of the dark day, with me, my good friend Chris Nebe, a director, a political commentator, in my eye, a fighter for justice, is sharing about our findings, how we feel about the 50 years ever since the passing away of Dr. Martin Luther King in terms of the American dream that he was in pursuit so much, working so hard about. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
谢谢你老朋友.
All right.
Welcome back to America.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, by the way, I just took a little vacation, tiny vacation, only for 2 weeks, and now I'm back. Okay, so far, over the 50 years, what have you seen? Are we or have we been better than 50 years, or still, or worse?
No, worse.
Worse?
I think worse, yes. The night before Martin Luther King was gunned down, he had a speech in Memphis, Tennessee. Allow me to read what he said. Man,
Not the whole thing, right?
No. Just men for many years now have been talking about war and peace. Now no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer a choice between violence and non-violence in this world. It is non-violence or non-existence. This is where we are today. And if you look at the news, nothing has changed. Violence is still the
when we talk about violence, we talk about violence, we talk
about war.
About war in two folds.
Right.
One could be domestic violence, right? I'm not talking about within the house domestic, between husband and wife.
War on drugs, war
We're
on
talking
this,
about
war on
the homeland
Right.
violence, right?
Yeah,
As a domestic.
yeah.
And then the second layer, you're talking about the international violence.
Correct.
Am I right?
Yeah.
So where you want to emphasize your comment? Domestic or international?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. What happens domestically?
Also he said, and I like to quote this because these are very substantial quotes which were very clear, shows you where Dr. Martin Luther King was coming from. The triple evil of poverty, racism, and militarism are forms of violence that exist in a vicious cycle. They are interrelated, all-inclusive, and stand as barriers to our living in the beloved community when we work to remedy one evil, we affect all evil.
Okay.
So what has changed in the past 50 years? Has Martin Luther King's dream come true? I don't think so.
Given the time when he spoke,
Yeah.
it made a lot of sense what he was talking about, what he was talking against, right? It really surprises me today when we review the sentences, the lines from Dr. Martin Luther King, we still feel the same thing. We'll still feel the same way that he was right back then and he is right now. Yeah. So that's the sorry part.
50 years later.
50 years later. Okay, now let's talk about domestic violence. Domestically, how do you want to comment on the violence when compared to 50 years ago?
I think I don't have the statistics, but I believe from what you read that the gun violence has constantly increased, both the mass shootings at the schools and also the police violence. So the whole country seems to be in a very vicious circle of extreme violence, which is spiraling instead of being calmed down. But that has all to do with the economic meltdown.
Well, anyway, how they are related could be another issue. But to give my audience some statistics numbers, that ever since Florida school shooting, there's no massive shooting after till now. So back then the number was 239 school shootings occurred ever since 2012 of Sandy Hook shooting, and among those shooting altogether, 438 kids died. Right? So those are the numbers, how bad. Back then, in the years when Martin Luther King was active, things were not that bad, right? What has caused that to happen, to give us such a drag down over 50 years of time, to your knowledge?
I think it's because social services are being cut, forcing more and more people into poverty, and this economic meltdown, because since that time, you see, 50 years ago, America had a wonderful middle class. People were working, they had income, and there was a solid lower middle class which were modestly happy. That has changed. Since 50 years, that group has always been almost extinguished. They lost their homes and they lost their jobs for various reasons, but that's a fact, and society has been unable to integrate these people or recreate that environment which existed 50 years ago.
Some people, the economists say that the shape of a society is like an olive, it's like a football, right? So it has a sharp tip here and a sharp tip here. In the middle, you have the ball, right? So now our society, when you talk about the middle income, right, the middle class, say the stronger the middle class part, the stronger the body of the ball, right? Now what we look at is that to cope along with your shrinking part, that the center part, the body part, which the average people take, the position that the average people take for, is shrinking. That is dangerous. They're dangerous. And those violence that happens with the same time, while this whole body of the middle part of the ball is shrinking though, you see more danger than anything else.
And depression.
That's my take.
And depression and a general fatalistic attitude about anything around you. This is again why you have the opioid crisis.
Exactly.
It all goes hand in
They
hand.
are interrelated, right?
Also the homeless.
Yeah.
Also the inhuman immigration policies where you are tearing people apart.
All right.
You know, you just, one morning there's a knock at the door and the father who, is not documented but has 3 children who are Americans.
Yeah, we'll slow down. We'll take care of that one by one because they are interrelated.
And of course, ever increasing racism and economic inequality.
All right. Well, my dear audiences, as a conclusion for that though, depressions were produced under depression, people could go wrong way. Some will go to drugs. That's exactly why we are facing the opioid pandemic right now, which is pointed out even by President Donald Trump at one meeting, say that we really have to get a hand on that before it's too late. So today with me, in sharing with you information in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, is my good friend Chris Nebe. He is a director and he is also a commentator for politics, and I call him fighter of justice. So we'll take a short moment now. When we come back, we'll take from the depression point of view, going towards the pandemic, which is the opioid pandemic. That will probably lead us to poverty, and the poverty will lead us to homeless, goes on and on. We'll see how the negative cycle goes and where it closes. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Hello, dear friends, my lovely audiences. Welcome back to the show. Jack Chow on the East West with G&E TV. With me today, my good friend, Mr. Chris Nebe, Hollywood director and political commentator. And to my eye, he's a fighter for justice that he earned. Well, day by day, day in, day out, I believe that is not an exaggeration. Yes, we are on the subject of talking about American Dream. The American Dream, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was once in promotion about, who was assassinated 50 years ago, exactly on April the 4th. So this month and this year marks the 50 years anniversary of the assassination. In commemoration with Dr. Martin Luther King, we want to do a rerun of the past 50 years, see how exactly we are from it. Are we starting at the same point? Are we doing better? If so, how much? So on and so forth. So now, we were at a point talking about people starting to see the depression, right? With the depression, they are misdirected or misled to wrong ways, including drugs. And with that, we started to see the opioid pandemic, the term we do not create it ourselves, the term used by Donald Trump, our president, the opioid pandemic. So can we start from that point on? What do you see, please?
Yes. You see, we know that America is controlled by corporations in reality. And Big Pharma is a huge contributor.
By the way, my audience, Big Pharma refers to the big pharmaceutical company as a short form in a little kind of a sarcastic way.
Yeah,
anyway,
Big Pharma. And Big Pharma has created the policies of Big Pharma have created are responsible for the opioid pandemic, and the opioid pandemic is effectively destroying the already very frail social fabric of the American society. For over 20 years, Big Pharma has enjoyed huge profits and almost total legal immunity. In order to cover up the real numbers of tragic death cases, coroners and traditional medical examiners, when issuing death certificates, often leave out if any drugs contributed to an untimely death. So this is actually so the numbers which we know, which were last year about over 65, almost 65,000, are much higher. And it is especially outrageous that doctors and Big Pharma worked hand in hand for over 20 years to create this epidemic, enjoying huge profits and almost total legal immunity. It's changing now on the outside, but you see, I think it's actually too late because in America now there are so many, in the inner cities, there are so many addicts because the medicine, by the pharmaceutical company, by big pharma created medicine prescribed by doctors were too expensive. So once the people were addicted, they're looking for cheaper alternatives, and they bought an illegally manufactured drug, which is very cheap to do, and it's called Phanatil, and that is mostly the case for overdosing. Phanatil.
Under whose name that is operated?
That's an underground operation, which is being done by.
Do we have even a brand name?
No, it's not sold by big pharma, but the big pharma became too expensive, so the addicts needed more, because you see, addiction comes, you need more and more and more. It doesn't stop, so they couldn't afford it. They were depressed already because they were poor. Now the medicine got too expensive, so they turned to the illegal drug, which is cheap to get, but also is the cause of the overdoses.
It is a mixture of all problems.
Yes.
The way I see is that when people are stricken by the economical downturn, the depression was produced, right? In order to deal with depression, they kind of seek for help. They kind of misled to drugs, right? When in the drug situation, in pursuing for drugs, there is always the Big Pharma Act, right? Whose price is higher, and in pursuance to get the cheaper price, though, they go to the black market. So that give a push to the black market. So in order to get that, people get high, people get overdosed.
Yes.
The OD deaths, the overdose death rate is so high. As you mentioned, 6,000 and more, way higher than that.
Right.
Way higher than that. And
because again, the authorities were in collusion. They wanted to keep it undercover. And therefore, the medical examiner, when you issue a death certificate, you have to mention the reason of this death. So many times they just eliminate the drug and said it was a heart attack or whatever. And it's interesting to know that no other industrial nation in the entire world is experiencing this scale of addiction and premature death. No other nation in the entire world. America stands out as number one.
when you say premature death, you're talking about death within...
Death by overdose.
By overdose.
Overdose is a premature death. It's, yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. And then, in order to get drugs, they need money, for which stealing started.
Right.
And it gives a push to crime.
Right.
Right? In order to deal with the crime, well, we do lots of stupid things in consequences. For example, we have the AB 109, right, which is early release jail term. And we have the Proposition of 47, which raises the crime level of the threshold, the entrance threshold, to 450, from 450 to 950. In other words, you can steal any amount below 950, still do not commit a crime. So the policies, the big farmers, and the economic downturn, that depression, all together work out a opioid problems.
Right. And the reason is, and when you look at it, then the 50 years ago, where there were a lot of problems, seemed to be like paradise. So the dream of Martin Luther King has gone nowhere. 50 years later, we are in worse shape, and all these regulations and like this prison release just shows you that actually society does not know how to handle this anymore, and they're having, it's like Band-Aid here, Band-Aid there, Band-Aid there. But the basic thing is that the whole social fabric of an entire nation is collapsing. That's what it is.
Exactly. When you talk about the pandemic that has gone to that much extent, though, you're certainly confirming that the social fabric is gotten rotten already, right? People either get a cure from bottom up, or you want to take care from up down. Other than that, there's no way of getting away from it.
A rejuvenation.
It's gonna suck the whole thing up.
Yes, the country is morally bankrupt. There's one interesting thing which I like to mention, Jack, which I just found out recently. It's a brazen example by Big Pharma that advertising on TV, they're constantly cheerfully advertising in prescription drugs, how well they work and all that. So then you go to your doctor and get the prescription. But this is a surefire recipe for misinformation, because and this is in nearly every developed country in the world, this type of television advertising is forbidden. You may look, next time you watch TV, it says, take this drug, it's very good, and then it says, when you have kidney problems, when you have this, consult your doctor. So there is like a disclaimer.
They don't want to be misled.
Right, but they are misleading you, because they promise you you take this drug and everything will be fine. And the interesting thing is, this type of advertising is only allowed in the United States of America and New Zealand. Nowhere else is this allowed. Well, that tells you something.
When you say United States, you're talking about whole United States?
Yes.
Or you're talking about certain states?
No. In America, this type of advertising on TV is allowed and is used, and the only other developed nation in the world where it is also allowed is New Zealand. Now, this tells you something. Here's a very big country, and there's a very small country. So there is something, it amazes me always how these things are obviously wrong, and as you can see, there are band-aids here and this and that, and in the end, it doesn't change the situation.
Yes, of course, you may get amazed to say, hey, how these things keep happening.
Yes.
And yet, by following my way, my philosophy, which I follow, in which I follow the word, the proverb saying that if you can't find it, follow the money. If you do follow the money, though, everything will come out clear who exactly is behind it, right? In this case, the big farmers.
Yes.
Right? In this case, the lobbyists.
Yes.
Right? Who get the benefit anyway, right? My dear friends, today, in commemoration of the 50 years of anniversary of passing away of Dr. Martin Luther King, we pick up a subject to compare the American dream of now and then. By comparing, we seem to have found out, in spite of the fact that 50 years have passed, we haven't seen a lot of change yet. On the contrary, things were probably even worse than back then. So we'll go area by area and to see how true exactly is. We're done halfway. Stay with us. We'll be right back, please. Hello, lovely audience. This is my dear fellow Angelinos. Welcome back to the show. Jack Chow on the East West with GNE TV. With me today is my good friend, Mr. Chris Nebe, a wonderful director with lots of credit. The credit kind of is like a monument. Lots of wonderful ones, major hits. He's also a fighter for justice in my eye, because he is my commentator on a weekly basis almost. So we are here picking up those areas, see how exactly it is going, and how much a difference have we made so far ever since the passing away of Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, we seem to have found it. The answer is not much, right? So back to my friend Chris Nebe. From the point when you started to see the opioid pandemic, though, which is closely related to that issue, comes along with poverty. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So, in other words, poverty goes after it. So when people smoked their money, burned their money, or injected their money, whatever way though, and they got to suffer.
By the way, Fanatil is not injected, it's a pill. It's the same thing, it's a pill, and it's the same thing as these depression pills. Only this is the big pharma who started it for huge profits. They make a lot of money. People cannot afford it anymore because they are poor. So they go to the cheap illegal drug which is manufactured like these drugs before. I mean, they always can do something cheap. You know, there are over 45 million Americans live below the poverty line. That tells you something, because the country has 330 million people, which is
huge.
Huge.
Yes,
and almost 49 million, including almost 17 million children, live in households that lack the means to get nutritious food on a regular basis. Most of them are people of color. 49 million.
So that gives a definite word of poverty.
Yes.
Right? So they are way below the national poverty line.
Right.
Nationally confirmed poverty line.
National confirmed poverty line is 45 million Americans. But 49 million Americans are, maybe a little bit above. They still cannot feed their kids.
How much do we think this thing happened to us in California only? Right? I see the way poverty goes along with homelessness.
Yes.
So how do you see that?
You're right. And I like to say something else. You see, 1 in 6 children in America may not know where their next meal comes from. 1 in 6 children is...
That's terrible.
And there are about 750,000 homeless in the USA.
They're terrible.
750. And
750 what? Million?
Million. 750,000.
No.
750,000 homeless in America, in all of America.
750,000?
Yeah.
No. That number is not correct. I can tell you right away.
Yeah?
All right.
More?
Yes. 2016, because the whole year of 2017, I was writing my project on this thing.
Yeah.
I had to base upon my writing, base my writing upon the statistics of 2016. Back then, the homeless of LA County only was 46,000.
Yes.
Right? And then 2017, new numbers released.
Yeah.
I was so surprised. I was caught so surprised to see the number goes from 46 to 54 million. Right? No, 54,000. Okay. That is LA County only. So when you talk about whole United States, the number is just only 10 times bigger than that. I don't think that that's an accurate number.
I don't know, but this is the
accurate
latest.
number, yeah.
It's even a little. It's not. It's about 750,000 homeless, and almost of these 750, there are almost 60,000 homeless families. Families are the fastest growing segment of the nation's homeless. Hundreds of thousands of kids are homeless and are roaming the streets. Then they end up doing petty crime.
I really want to find out, during Martin Luther King's time, if there's any numbers of the same statistics.
I don't think so.
And versus the population back then, for example. A population was not 3.2, no, 32 something million, right?
Yeah.
Population.
It was about 300 million at that time, 50 years ago. A little bit less than 300.
Well, that
million.
makes sense. Yeah, only that would make sense, because when we find a number back then, and we find the population back then, and we can find out the percentage. And now when we know the total number of population, and then we get the total number of the poverty line, below the poverty line, the people, and then we get another percentage, we can compare these two.
I will find that out next time. I will tell you, but I can tell you already now that I'm convinced that it is at least 60% less. There wasn't that kind of homeless crisis, because now it's really becoming a crisis, and it's becoming because the lower middle class is being forced into this situation. People, many people I hear have to take 2 jobs to be able to feed the families, and I mean just go to the grocery store. For example, the dollar stores, the $1 stores.
The Dollar Tree thing, 99-cent store, yes.
They are doing very, very well because people cannot afford to go to regular supermarkets, which are more expensive. And you see, bad nutrition makes you vulnerable for illnesses. If you don't have money, you also cannot go to a doctor. The drastic cuts. Remember some weeks ago we talked about the cuts in social benefits
yes.
and welfare. The drastic cuts, which are huge, now it always hits the poor. Always the poor and the disenfranchised are becoming more.
And the Social Security is going to bankrupt somehow between 2020 to 2030, that's what they say.
So now you have desperate people which are poor, have nothing to lose, and you see, when people have nothing to lose, they become aggressive. That means there is violence.
Yes.
Now there's violence. Now in America you have this big divide. All the time they talk about people of color, people this, people that. So all this is like a vicious circle. I mean, you will always have poor people in every country. In Europe, where we have a socialist government, we have also poor people, we also have homeless people, but not to that extent. And it's a different feeling. Yesterday I picked up somebody from the airport, and from just driving from the airport home, I saw at least 20 people lying on the streets, sleeping, because it was evening. Now, I mean, after all, this is America.
For that, the county of Orange County and the city of LA downtown, they kind of put up some role model stuff for people to follow. What if we use the pattern of Orange County, though? The city council gets involved in the motivation of business owners, hotel business owners, to give the voucher for hotel rooms, right? for 1 month at a time. And when they needed more months, and then they provide them with more month. And that seems to have tackled the issue, especially those coldest winter days. And yet now you see the mayor and the whole councilship are facing obstacles, right? And lots of people ask that, where's my park?
Jack, between you and me, I think it's too little, too late. Because you see, it has become so big that all of a sudden they must act, and they put another Band-Aid. Just look for example, as the scandal with Facebook. It has become so big that now they have to act and get that young billionaire in front of the government, where he sits in front of people, and I have the figures, who he paid contribution to campaign contributions. So I mean, it's such a vicious circle. Here they pay you as a congressman for your election campaign. They pay you money. Of course, you are not going to bite the hand who feeds you. So it's a vicious circle, and it continues and continues. And basically, I'm sorry to say, it's the bankruptcy of the American type of capitalism.
All right. Well, that's a bigger term, and there's another issue we want to take a break with and come back to talk about it. With me today, my friend Chris Nebe shed light on the issues all the way up from the commemoration of Martin Luther King to check about the dream, to start to see the opioid pandemic problems, and then to see the whole poverty, and then we see the homelessness, and now we are about to discover what's next. So stay with us. We'll be right back, please. Hello, dear friends, my lovely audience. Welcome back to the show. Jack Chow on the East West Show with the GNE TV. With my good friend Chris Nebe, a director of Hollywood, fighter for justice. I seem to feel kind of getting a handle about what we have so far discovered as the fabric of the society of the United States of America, being not exactly much better than 50 years ago when Dr. Martin Luther King had passed away. So with me, my good friend Chris Nebe, welcome back. And it's your turn to tell us, from a poverty, from homeless then, what problem do we still have?
Many problems, Jack. For example, the issue of gun control.
Okay.
See, the issue of gun control. There's a lot of gun control. I think we shouldn't touch the Second Amendment, because there have been so many changes to the Constitution already that now they're fiddling with the First Amendment and free speech. Everywhere you go, you can see that the Constitution, which basically was a good piece of paper, is being cut and changed and cut away, and the rights of the citizens which have been granted are being reduced. So now it's the gun control. I don't think, first of all, there are so many guns out there you can't control them anymore. So leave the Second Amendment in order, but make buying guns difficult. And
either way,
huh?
Either way.
Yeah.
Either way, the hard. Yes.
Yeah, make it difficult, because if you go to a gun show, you'll be amazed what you can buy there. You can buy anything, and nobody asks you. They just give me the cash, and you walk out with an automatic gun which you can kill. So I like to say something
Uh-huh.
which may be a little sensitive, but
Okay.
this effort now to use this gun violence in order to abolish the Second Amendment actually means that we the people will be disarmed. Now, once we the people have been disarmed, any uprising of we the people will be easily controlled by an authoritarian government.
But the essence of having the gun right is that is to arm the people
So that they
in
can
case the government fails them.
That's it. That's
Right?
what the
It is
intention
not
was.
for the invasion of foreign intruders. That's that's the bigger business belongs to the federal.
Right.
It's their job to defend the country. It is our job as we the people we're vested with the right to protect our own privacy,
Right.
our own freedom.
So all of a sudden,
that is the significance of Constitution
So-
Amendment number 2.
So when you said, the land of the free and home of the brave, sounds great, but these freedoms are constantly being shrunk down by the powers that be, because they want to control the people, because the people are more and more difficult to control because of the poverty and the desperation in the country. And I don't know if you were here when they had the Rodney King riots.
Yeah, of course.
Years
I was
ago,
there. I was there. Yeah.
I saw
1994,
Is it that
94
oh.
something. Yeah.
I saw the supermarkets plundered and everything. And at that time, a friend of mine, I was overlooking the east side where it was all burning and everything, and a friend of mine gave me a gun, brought me a gun, and said, look, it's sort of a semi-automatic, and said, look, this is for your protection in case they come. But living in Beverly Hills, it was the police, which nothing happened. But it burned up to the borders of Beverly Hills.
Okay.
So I'm telling you, if you saw this, and the supermarkets where there were all these old cars, we're talking how long? 25 years ago, right? Cars, old cars of the poor people, loaded up with looted stuff, and the National Guard had shot into the tires. So they were sitting there and couldn't drive.
That's the riot you're talking about.
Yes.
That's the riot they're talking about.
That's
For
really
for the first 3 days, right after the first fire, though, it was really a havoc, great havoc. The people kind of like walk in the store, take whatever they want.
Oh, yeah,
Really.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So of course later they all got to return that. But those kind of things will never happen, or seldom happen, back then to Martin Luther King's day.
No, there were other things. There were racial motivated brutalities, violences, and injustices. Racial, and that was very difficult, but different. But now it's economic and racial and legal inequality, and all of a sudden that huge hunt of the illegal immigrants. All of a sudden, these are very poor people. And these people are now being responsible for everything which is wrong in this country. This is totally wrong and completely different. So actually, Martin Luther King's dream has become the American nightmare. As far
That
as I'm
conclusion
concerned.
sounds very scary.
It is
and
scary.
it's very kind of discouraging. And of course, I would, as a show here, I would like to pull up the string to lift high our spirit in believing the dream of America. Of course, we might face some times when we see the obstacles and we see some hardships that will never or shall never rock the foundation of our belief, our trust in the American dream.
But today, his dream is actually a sad reminder of a hopeless plea that echoes across a morally bankrupt world, because not only America, it's the world. And you know, his last words before he was gunned down, and you remember that the most famous work of Martin Luther King, who received in 1964 the Nobel Prize,
Nobel Prize, yes,
for peace, and it was him who helped to win the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They are lonely landmarks of a stagnant American evolution of its civic culture, because nothing has happened. And his last words before he was gone down, and that's maybe the positive moment you wish to end the show on, is, I quote, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." That's what he said in the night.
And shortly after that, he was shot.
He was shot the next day, and he was 39 years old when he was assassinated. And he is one of those people which will never in history be forgotten, like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King will be a fighter who humbly supported the downtrodden and poor at great cost to his life, and he eventually paid for it.
So what hurt me most is that we're now 50 years later, we're still at the threshold, looking inside for the American dream. Looking outside, going around us, things around us, we see a more corrupted fabric of the society in all aspects.
In all fairness, you have to say something. If you consider that in 1965 there was a Voting Rights Act enacted, America about, 30 years later voted for president a person of color, namely a black person, President Obama. So, you know, these are the contradictions. It's not all that bad.
If Dr. Martin Luther King was not assassinated, the first black American president would be him.
Could be.
Could be, right?
Yeah,
could be him.
Yes.
Right. All right, my dear friend, today, in commemoration for the passing away, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we have done a review of the past 50 years in terms of checking on the American dream. Has the dream been realized? Has we been dreaming better, or are we? If not, if yes, what? If not, what? So, with me today is my good friend Chris Nebe, who has done lots of research in this area. As a fighter for justice, he never stops on calling people to think, or the third time, for the fourth time, for whatever we have done to the American dream to make the American dream better. All right, my dear friends, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching.